Here are 5 ancient nightmares that scientists have looked at, laughed at, and then ruined with logic. Imagine being an ancient Greek sailor. You've been at sea for months, smelling like brine and bad decisions. You land on an uncharted island, desperate for fresh water and maybe a goat to roast. You wander into a dark, damp cave, torch in hand, the shadows dancing violently against the limestone walls. You turn a corner, and there, staring back at you from the gloom, is a skull. But not a human skull. This thing is massive, twice the size of your head, and right in the middle of its forehead, where the nose and eyes should be, is a single gaping, cavernous hole. You drop your torch. You run back to the ship screaming. You tell the crew you found a giant, a one-eyed giant, a Cyclops. For centuries, the Cyclops was the ultimate boogeyman of the Mediterranean. They were the sons of Poseidon, blacksmiths for the gods, and generally unpleasant dinner hosts who preferred their guests raw and screaming. Homer wrote about them in the Odyssey, describing Polyphemus as a shaggy mountain of flesh who smashed sailors' heads against rocks like puppies and ate them whole. They were uncivilized, lawless, and solitary. But the origin story of the Cyclops isn't about a god sleeping with a sea nymph. It's about a confused Greek tourist finding a fossil and failing basic anatomy. Here's the transformation story, not of a man into a monster, but of a bone into a legend. Millions of years ago, during the Pleistocene epoch, the Mediterranean islands Sicily, Malta, Crete looked very different. They were home to a specific type of megafauna, the dwarf elephant. These weren't the towering beasts of the African savanna. They were roughly the size of a large pony, having evolved to be smaller due to the limited resources on the islands. They lived, they trumpeted, and eventually they died. Their bones were scattered across the island caves, preserved in the cool darkness. Fast forward a few million years. The elephants are long extinct. No human has ever seen one alive. Enter the Greeks. They find these skulls. Now look at an elephant skull. It doesn't look like a horse or a cow. It has a massive bulbous shape, heavy cheekbones, and crucially, a gigantic central nasal opening where the trunk attaches. To a Greek sailor who has never seen an elephant, that central hole isn't a nose. It's an eye socket. A single, massive eye socket. And since the skull is twice the size of a human's, the creature it belonged to must have been a humanoid giant. The transformation in the public consciousness was immediate. The trunk hole became the eye. The tusks, if found, became boar's teeth worn as jewelry or tools used by the giant. The logic was flawless, provided you ignore the fact that the creature would have had no nose to breathe through. But hey, when you're fleeing a cave in terror, you aren't stopping to check for a septum. The Cyclops wasn't a monster. It was a cute pony-sized elephant that had been dead for 10,000 years. But try telling that to Odysseus. And if you thought mistaking a nose for an eye was embarrassing, wait until you see what happens when ancient miners start playing connect the dots with dinosaur bones in the desert. Meet the Griffin. You know the one. The majestic, gold-hoarding hybrid with the body of a lion and the head and wings of an eagle. They were the ferocious guardians of the gold deposits in the Scythian mountains. Pliny the Elder wrote about them. Herodotus mentioned them. They were fierce, noble, and would absolutely rip your face off if you touched their treasure. The vivid description of the griffin is specific. 4 legs, a beak like a raptor, a long tail, and claws that could shred armor. They laid eggs in burrows on the ground and were obsessively protective of their nests, which just so happened to be situated near veins of gold. So, how does a lion mate with an eagle? It doesn't, unless you're looking at the fossilized remains of a protoceratops. Let's look at the origin story of this gold-guarding nightmare. The setting is the Gobi Desert, roughly 7th century BC. This area was traversed by Scythian nomads, fierce warriors and gold miners who traded along the early Silk Road. The landscape is brutal. Red sandstone cliffs, shifting sands, and wind that scours the earth. In these red cliffs, the white fossilized bones of Protoceratops are incredibly common. Protoceratops was a sheep-sized dinosaur. It had a beak exactly like a bird. It had a frill at the back of its skull, which, if the neck bones are broken or shifted, which happens a lot in fossils, looks remarkably like large folded wings or pointed ears. It had a long tail. It walked on 4 legs. Now, imagine you are a Scythian miner. You are digging into the red rock looking for gold dust. You strike something hard. You brush away the sand and see a creature with the beak of a bird but the body of a beast. It's staring right at you from the rock. The transformation from fossil to monster is purely logical here. You see the beak, so you think bird. You see the 4 distinct quadruped legs, so you think lion. You see the weird shoulder blades and neck frill, and you think wings. But the real kicker, the behavior. Protoceratops fossils are often found in clusters, suggesting they lived in herds or family groups. They laid hard-shelled eggs, clutches of which have also been found fossilized. And where were the Scythians finding these stone beasts? Right next to the gold they were mining. The Scythians didn't think these were fossils of extinct animals. They thought they were the skeletons of creatures that had died recently. They assumed the live ones were just over the next dune, watching them. The myth that griffins guarded gold was born simply because the fossils were eroding out of the same rock formations that held the gold deposits. The griffin is basically a misunderstanding of geology. It's a herbivorous dinosaur that got rebranded as a gold-digging chimera because humans can't look at a rock without projecting their own greed onto it. As if nightmares weren't already overcrowded, here's another monster crashing the party, and this one smells like rotting fish. The Kraken. For centuries, sailors whispered about the Leviathan, the Hafgufa, the Kraken. A monster of the deep so large that when it surfaced, sailors mistook it for an island. They would land on its back, start a fire to cook dinner, and then, surprise, the island would scream and drag them all to a watery grave. Later versions described it as a giant crab or octopus that could wrap its tentacles around a 3-masted ship and snap it like a toothpick. The fear was palpable. The ocean is terrifying enough when you can't see the bottom. Add in a creature that can swallow your entire vessel, and you have the perfect recipe for never leaving the dock. But the Kraken has a very real, very slimy origin. The transformation here isn't from bone to beast, but from a rare glimpse of reality to a legend of exaggeration. The creature is the Architeuthis dux, the giant squid. Now we know giant squids exist today. We have footage of them. But in the 12th or 13th century, seeing a giant squid was like seeing a UFO. These creatures live in the crushing blackness of the deep ocean. They almost never come to the surface unless they are dying or dead. A medieval Norse sailor is navigating the choppy, gray waters of the North Atlantic. The water is calm until suddenly the surface breaks. A mass of red, gelatinous flesh, easily 40 or 50 feet long, churns the water. Huge tentacles, thick as tree trunks and lined with serrated suction cups, thrash in the air. Or perhaps they saw the aftermath of a battle. Sperm whales love to eat giant squids. It's their favorite snack. But squids don't go down without a fight. Sailors would catch whales covered in circular scars, sucker marks the size of dinner plates. They would find indigestible squid beaks in whale stomachs, beaks the size of a human hand. The sailors take this data, the thrashing tentacles, the giant scars, the massive beaks, and their brains fill in the gaps. If the tentacle is that big, the body must be the size of a city. If it fights whales, it must eat ships. The Kraken wasn't magic. It was just deep-sea gigantism. But the irony is that the exaggerated stories weren't that far off. The giant squid is terrifying. It has eyes the size of basketballs, a beak that can slice through cable, and it fights whales in the crushing dark. The only thing the sailors got wrong was the size. It can't drag down a galleon, but it could definitely ruin your afternoon. Nature decided a beak wasn't enough. Let's add hooks and suction cups and make it invisible to radar. Thanks, evolution. But let's move from the deep sea to the shallow grave. Because if you think the ocean is bad, wait until you hear about what happens to your neighbor Dave after he dies. Let's talk about vampires. Forget the cape. Forget the glitter. Forget the brooding aristocrat in a castle. The original vampire was a peasant named Peter who died of the plague and then came back to annoy everyone. The historical vampire was a disgusting creature. It wasn't pale, it was ruddy or dark-faced. It looked swollen like a tick full of blood. It had long fingernails. It wore its burial shroud, which it often chewed on in the grave. And most importantly, it was blamed for wasting diseases that killed entire families. The origin of the vampire myth is a step-by-step guide to not understanding how human decomposition works. It's 17th century Eastern Europe. A small village is struck by tuberculosis or cholera. People are dying. Panic sets in. The villagers decide that the first person who died, let's call him Gregor, must be doing this. He is draining the life from his family from beyond the grave. So they grab their shovels and go to the cemetery to exhume Gregor. They dig him up to check if he's really dead. And this is where the horror begins. When they open the coffin, Gregor doesn't look like a skeleton. He looks fat. He looks well fed. His face is swollen and red. There is fresh blood at the corners of his mouth. His hair and fingernails look like they've grown longer since he was buried. To the villagers, this is undeniable proof. "Look at him," they scream. "He's fat with our blood. He's growing. He's been eating." So they stake him, cut off his head, and burn the body. The plague probably continues, but hey, at least they dealt with Gregor. But here's the scientific reality of what they saw. It's called decomposition. As bacteria in the gut break down the internal organs, they release massive amounts of gas. This gas bloats the body, turning a skinny peasant corpse into a swollen, round figure. The pressure pushes blood from the organs out to the surface, making the face look red and ruddy, not pale. As the gas pressure builds in the chest cavity, it forces decomposing fluid and liquefied lung tissue up the windpipe and out the mouth and nose. This is called purging fluid. It looks exactly like blood. So when the villagers see blood on the corpse's mouth, they assume he's been drinking it. In reality, he's just leaking. Third, the growing hair and nails. Hair and nails do not grow after death. However, the skin dehydrates and retracts. As the gums recede, the teeth look longer. As the fingertips shrink, the nails look longer. And finally, the noise. Sometimes when a stake was driven into a bloated corpse, the escaping gas would be forced through the throat, creating a groaning or screaming sound. Imagine the trauma. You stake a dead body and it screams at you. The vampire isn't a supernatural predator. It's a biology lesson gone wrong. It's the result of pre-germ theory humans trying to make sense of contagion and the horrifying realities of rotting meat. Nothing says dinner party like eating your best friend's leg, apparently, or at least being accused of it because you exploded in your coffin. We create monsters because the truth is often boring, or gross, or just confusing. We see a bone, we invent a giant. We see a corpse, we invent a vampire. We hear a noise, we invent a demon. It's our way of putting a face on the unknown so we can try to hit it with a stick. Which one freaked you out the most? The exploding corpse vampire or the misunderstood wombat? Let me know in the comments. As always, thank you very much for watching. My name is Solomon, and I am really smart. Until next time, farewell.